Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Thursday, February 20th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app. The app contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process. And it contains a copy of the Drago and Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so by giving us a call at 563, nope, I'm on autopilot. By emailing, you can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a comment or a question from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then, as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. Now, if you're listening to us on the internet at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're grateful to have you here. We're glad to be able to make the connection, and yet if you're listening through that venue, you cannot type a comment or raise a hand to talk to us directly. In order to do that, you will need to download the Needle app from your app store. NEDL. It's AI tuner for radio. And once you download the app and log in, enter a couple questions, you'll have the option to type in a comment or raise a hand to talk to us voice to voice. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, whether it's through an email or a comment typed into the app or speaking to us directly through the app. We appreciate it because it makes it so much easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, and that is just boatloads easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. Let us know how we can be of assistance and support. We have support groups that happen on Tuesday and Thursday night. So this is a Thursday, there'll be a support group tonight. And in the support groups on a regular basis, people can be step through a worksheet process, or they can discuss dynamics in their life that are challenging and how they might approach them differently. And we are grateful for the opportunity to support people in that way as well. And in lieu of somebody raising a hand or typing a comment in the app, I'm free to do whatever I'd like to do. And in this case, what I will do is go back to the reading with commentary that I've been doing of Alan Cohen's most recent book. As far as I know, it's his most recent book. It's titled Of Course in Miracles. And in that book, we are reading it with commentary, and the commentary is frequently discussing and describing the parallels that I see between Alan's observations about the Course in Miracles and other prominent teachers that we feature in this work and in the support groups. And the primary reason that I do that and do it so frequently is rooted in an observation that Dr. Michael Ryce made in one of the first lectures that I listened to from him, and that was that the more different perspectives I can gain on something that I'm trying to learn that might be new to me, the faster it'll start to make sense to me and the deeper my understanding will be. So I'll learn it faster and I'll learn it deeper if I hear the same kind of thing from a variety of different perspectives. In that original lecture, Dr. Ryce was talking about how he was going to be speaking about information from religion, philosophy, and science, hard science, and psychology, etc., as he was talking about the tool of forgiveness, which is a very specific tool for dismantling judgment, dismantling perception, dismantling anything that we experience that's less than love, whether it's inside of ourselves or it's an interpretation we're placing on something outside of ourselves. And so in that particular reading, in that workshop that I listened to many times, he talked about discussing life and the consciousness that we all share, and or the consciousness that it may be called God, and our tendency to create experiences that are emotionally loaded, to talk about all of it from the perspective of philosophy, religion, science, psychology, etc., and how all of those different schools of thought hold the same kinds of observations, even if they're using slightly different words or slightly different metaphors or slightly different parables to teach the same thing. And they might even argue that they're talking about very different things. But if you have what Michael Ryce would call the brain cells to understand it, if you've got the perspective, if you've got the ability to live in the questioning state, you will probably discover that much of what is being talked about with a particular jargon from this field and a different kind of verbiage and jargon from another field is much the same thing. There is only life, there is only consciousness, and it's the same for all of us, whether we realize it or not, at deeper and deeper levels. So when I left off yesterday, I was reading in the book Of Course in Miracles. The subtitle is When Love Becomes a Way of Life. And I had finished reading the 16th chapter of that book and I had not yet read the miraculous insights. So I will begin today by asking the 7 questions that Alan Cohen poses at the end of the 16th chapter to try and spark us to live in the question and maybe find our own insights. Question number 1 is there anything that seems to be a nightmare in your life? If so, what is it? Second question, how would you feel to know that you will awaken from the bad dream and it will have had no effect on you? Third question, how have you received mercy, grace, or forgiveness in your life? Fourth question, if you have been blessed so far, can you see how your blessing will only continue? Fifth question, how might a big challenge be a sign that you are on the verge of a breakthrough? Sixth question, do you believe that pain or suffering buys you a place in heaven? Seventh question, would you be willing to trade in that old burdensome belief for a new belief? How about a belief that joy is your ticket to heaven? And then he offers an affirmation. He says, I affirm that no dark dream has power over me. I affirm that I awaken into the light of my perfect wholeness. I affirm that grace has always cared for me, and it shall forever continue. And I affirm that I replace any value in pain with a new value in total well-being. The 17th chapter in this book is titled Loved, Guided, and Sustained. Alan writes, recently divorced Ivy Olson had 2 small boys, no money, and a nearly empty refrigerator as the holiday season approached. Depressed and fearful, she had no idea how she was going to care for herself and her family. Then an older woman in her garden apartment complex invited Ivy and her sons for Thanksgiving dinner. That neighbor laid out a feast of Ivy's favorite foods and demonstrated she knew things about Ivy that she shouldn't have known. The woman sent Ivy home with leftovers that would feed her family for a week. The unconditional love that this neighbor showed Ivy gave her faith that she and her boys were going to make it through this tough time. The next morning, Ivy went to the woman's apartment to return some Tupperware containers. Ivy looked in the window and was shocked to find the apartment completely empty without a stitch of furniture. When Ivy went to the building manager to ask what had become of the woman, he told her that that apartment had been vacant for months. And then he gives a link to a YouTube video titled Dinner with an Angel. It's a Miracle. Alan writes, we too are being guided and protected, whether an angel whispers in your ear, or you have an uncanny intuition that proves itself, or perhaps the perfect person shows up at the right moment. You are being cared for by a higher power. The same compassionate source, capital S source, that blessed Ivy Olson and her boys, that same source is available to all of us. Love has no favorites and makes no exceptions. The workbook, lesson 50, is quoted here as saying, I am sustained by the love of God. In A Course in Miracles, Jesus makes it very clear that he and the grace of God are always with us. He quotes the workbook 156 as saying, Who walks with me? This question should be asked 1,000 times a day until certainty has ended doubting and established peace. Close quotes. Alan writes, while the idea of separation takes many forms, the most fundamental one is that we are split off from the presence of God. And somehow or another, we're outside of love's embrace. I just had to check the app here for a minute to see if there was a comment or a caller, and my app is telling me that we're alone. So for now, we'll just keep reading, hoping that people can get access to this either live and not showing on the app or through the archive. Alan goes on and writes, sometimes spirit reaches us through direct inner guidance, and at other times, spirit reaches us through people and animals. My friend Peter is a musician in Philadelphia. He had a terribly rough day. His girlfriend broke up with him, and when he went to his club engagement that night, his manager informed him that his band had been fired. Utterly dejected, Peter began to make his way through the city streets. He grew so distraught that he set his guitar on the sidewalk, fell to his knees, and began to sob. At that moment, a stray little puppy worked its way under Peter's arm and began to lick the tears off his cheeks. Peter felt so comforted by this miraculous intervention that he rose with renewed confidence and began to walk home, the puppy walking at his heels. When Peter arrived, his girlfriend had returned, and she reported that his band manager had phoned to report that he had gotten the band an even better gig. Everything turned around in a short time. Peter invited his girlfriend to step onto the porch to meet the healing puppy, but it was gone. The little angel had done its job of teaching Peter that he was not alone and the universe had his back. He quotes from the Course in Miracles, "He will not leave you comfortless, nor fail to send his angels down to you in his own name." Alan writes, years ago, my girlfriend and I bought a house together. After several years, we decided to part amicably, and she would move out. The house was in a rural area, and when I considered the prospect of living there alone, I felt anxious. Part of me wanted to go out and find another girlfriend so I could avoid feeling lonely. However, I decided not to give in to that temptation, and to instead consider being there alone as a spiritual opportunity. To my happy surprise, I very much enjoyed my alone time. I did not need a girlfriend to save me from facing myself. I ended up using the time very productively. Eventually, I entered another relationship, and when I did, I looked back with gratitude upon my decision to be with myself in a conscious way. When we recognize our identity as spiritual beings, we are never alone. He quotes A Course in Miracles, the workbook, lesson 76, where it says, "You really think you are alone unless another body is with you." Alan writes, space between relationships is highly empowering. I know people who jump from one relationship to the next with hardly any time in between. It's tempting after a breakup to lurch to find someone to fill your sense of emptiness. However, the time after a breakup is a fertile opportunity to deepen your relationship with yourself. Many people lose themselves in a relationship. If you choose a partner in order for that person to complete you, you've overlooked the truth that you're already complete. Two half people getting together does not add up to a whole person. My favorite way of saying that is, If you have a person who only feels like half a person, and they run out and they find a relationship with another person who only feels like half a person, if these two half people get together, all you've got is, pardon the pun, a bloody mess. You need two whole people coming together to form an actual relationship. I'm turning on the microphone for Celinda. Are you there? Welcome, Celinda. If you're speaking, I can't hear you, which makes me wonder whether or not I'm being heard. Hello, Celinda. Are you there? It says you're in the queue, and it says I'm talking, or that you're talking. Buffy says that she is hearing me. All right. Are you also hearing Celinda? And Susan says, I'm loud and clear, even though the app is telling me I have no listeners. So thank you for the comments to let me know that you're there. And I will once again ask if Celinda is being heard. Okay. All right. So people are not hearing Celinda, but they are hearing me. Thank you for the feedback. I will hope that Celinda tries again if she is interested in speaking. And I'll continue the reading despite the fact that the app tells me there's nobody listening. So that interruption leads me to remember that yesterday when I was doing the reading, I was reading about Alan had written about a gentleman who was in the concentration camps who was strong and vibrant and healthy. And when they liberated the camps, they thought, oh, he must be a recent arrival. And they did a debriefing with people, and they debriefed him and said, did you just get here? And he said, no, he's been there, I think it was 7 years. Now, the rest of that story I learned from reading the book, The Gentle Art of Blessing with Pierre Pradervand. And the story is that this gentleman spoke a multitude of languages, and he was an attorney in Poland, in the ghetto in Poland, when the Nazis came in and did a clean sweep and lined up his family in front of them and shot them all dead. And this gentleman, they called him Wild Bill because they couldn't pronounce his name. He was Polish with a big long name. And Wild Bill begged them to shoot him. Kill me too. You've killed my whole family. I have no reason to live. And they told him, no, you're too valuable. You speak too many languages. And what Wild Bill told the people as he was liberated from the camp was that in that moment, he had a decision to make. His entire family had just been decimated in front of him, shot to death. And he had been an attorney, and he said that he knew from being an attorney what hate does to people's lives. And so he made the decision in that moment, whether he lived another hour or another year, that he was not going to give in to hate. And as a result, he chose love as soon and often as he could, all throughout the time, even though he was in a concentration camp where they were being severely abused and fed food that wasn't really enough to keep them nourished and just enough to keep them alive so they could work in the camps. And yet his body remained far more healthy and vibrant and vigorous than those who chose for bitterness and resentment and love, over love. And so in the story told by Pierre Pradervand in the book, The Gentle Art of Blessing, you get more of the detail of the story that Alan Cohen had referenced in the last chapter. And I just wanted to make sure that people know that there's more to that story than the way Alan told it, because there's evidence from the debriefing that the gentleman, who they nicknamed Wild Bill, had chosen for love, and that was the dynamic that he understood was responsible for his health and vigor. And that's the same kind of thing that you'll hear when you read a book like Lessons of Life from Death Row, written by Pierre Pradervan, but about Roger McGowan, who was a gentleman who'd been sentenced to death row in Texas for a crime he didn't commit. And instead of choosing bitterness and upset and vengeance and hatred, etc., he chose to become a spiritual teacher. And his life experience was shaped by that choice, as all of our lives are shaped, whether we realize it or not, by the way we choose to interpret and respond to life events. And that choice of how to interpret and respond to life events is the thing that creates our experience of life. So I'm taking a minute here to respond to Celinda, and I'll let her know that my app does not show anyone in the queue. So we're having some glitches in the technology, but we will keep going. And thank you all for your patience as we're working with this technology, which we're, I believe, blessed to have. And perhaps, Celinda, if you want to call, you should close out your app and open it again and see if that makes a difference. And I'll keep checking in the comments and on the queue to see if you show up again. And as I've mentioned, my app is not showing any listeners, so I can't give you any other feedback. There's clearly a glitch going on here. So I was mentioning that this observation that I make has worked its way into my 10 bottom line observations that I've typed up and I hand out on my letterhead to patients when they come in either a first or second session. And that particular observation says, what happens to me and around me in this life is nowhere near as important as how I choose to interpret and respond to those events. It is my infinite capacity to choose the focus of my conscious awareness in each new present moment. That's something each and every one of us have, even if we're not taught about it. And it is what I choose to focus my conscious awareness upon that is the active mechanism that creates my experience of life moment to moment. So Julia says the sound is good today. And Susan Bingham is raising a hand to talk. Are you there, Susan? Hello, Susan.
Hey.
I heard some clicking.
Hi. Can you hear
Hello.
me? Hello? Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. And my app says you have 7 listeners now.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And how's the sound quality today?
Excellent. It's
Good.
fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, what are your thoughts? How can we support you today? How can you
Well,
support us today?
Well, I'm reading a wonderful book for the second time. It's called The Cunning Man by Robertson Davies. Have you ever heard of that book? It's
No.
written in 1995, Canadian writer. And talk about perspective. I won't go into the story, but I want to read a tiny. This is certainly a perspective that all of us could take, and I know the Course in Miracles says it too. This particular part is about a priest who is dying, and he had had many visions of Jesus when he was younger. But he's talking about the bad guys. He says, great affairs demand great actions, and often there is somebody who must take a great risk. Remember Judas, the betrayer, and the execrated one. I've never heard of that word, execrated. The execrated one, but could anybody seriously doubt that at this moment Judas has his place in paradise because he made possible the great drama on which the world's salvation hangs? Every tragic action needs a Judas, no hero without a villain. Is it not the blackest ingratitude and the stupidest philosophical error to condemn that necessary figure? And when I read that, this is toward the end of the book, I've heard that from the Course in Miracles. Sort of the bad actors are, we could think of them as sacrificing themselves to forward the destiny of the planet or people or whatever. And do you remember a place in the Course in Miracles that said something similar?
No, I know that people who studied it, and Dr. Michael Ryce is one, have come up with the idea that this message of suffering is not the message that was intended.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't remember whether it was Dale Allen Hoffman or Dr. Michael Ryce who talk about, if you were going to undergo one of the biggest trials and tribulations of your life and you knew it was coming, who would you want to be there with you, right? To hand you over? Your best friend, right? You'd want
Yeah,
comfort and support in that moment of what has been called the betrayal, right? And Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss, and then the Roman soldiers knew who Jesus was, and they, as though somehow or another they wouldn't have known who he was unless you gotten the signal that I'm going to go kiss the guy that you need to take off
right.
and crucify. So there's all kinds of inconsistencies in the story, and logically anyway. And yet the message that people like Dale Allen Hoffman talk about, and whether they got it from A Course in Miracles, or they got it from their own meditation and study, or they got it from people like Elaine Pagels and those people that study the actual historic text. But the message is, this was a planned activity that Yeshua agreed to try and demonstrate that no matter what happens, love is the answer.
Mm.
And in order for that demonstration to take place, he had to face the worst of the worst. And so the theory is, from those who subscribe to it, that the theory is that Judas agreed to play the role.
Right.
And just as you're reading about in this book, that if he hadn't, either somebody else would have had to play the role, or it
Mm.
couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And of course, that's just us trying to make sense of things from a couple thousand years
Right.
after the fact, in the way that our minds have been trained intellectually to think that they have everything sussed out in logic.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of it, who knows?
Exactly. But when you talk about allowing, and when I read this, I thought this just helps me. It's another way of allowing things that are happening right now, with the news getting, in my opinion, worse and worse every day. Another way of allowing what is happening. It isn't that this is the truth, just as you say. How do we know? We can't know. But it helps widen the field to make the circle big enough so that bad actors can be invited in. It's another way of
Well,
phrasing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and in the way of mastery, lesson 3, it would encourage us to make the same statement that you just made and drop the word bad out of it, so
Right.
that all actors are allowed in.
Right.
So that, because the way it's stated in the way of mastery in the third lesson is that Yeshua says, I realized at a young age that the greatest gift that could ever come to me, the greatest gift I could ever receive, would only come to me if I dismantled every judgment and every perception.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so uh, labeling an actor as good or bad is a judgment.
It is. Yep.
And so I would agree with that if you just drop the word bad, that all actors, everything that happens in the flow of life is just perfect. It gives me an opportunity to choose how I'm going to respond. And if I
Mm-hmm.
choose to respond from that place of calm, compassion, loving energy, I create a very different experience of life than if I choose to respond in bitterness or resentment or tightness or tension or contraction or anger or grief, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So take a breath and let's see if I touch the icon for Celinda, if she can join us on the call.
Okay.
Celinda, are you in the air?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Very soft, but I do hear you.
Yes, you've gotten very soft also. Before you were loud.
Well,
I
Both
it,
of
know
you
it,
sound
it,
that
loud.
it,
didn't sound very good, did it?
so aside from the sound quality, Celinda, what are your thoughts? How can we support you today?
Well, I called in to do a worksheet, and then when Susan called and said what she called, I just about busted my brain cells because I have been reading a book by a Kabbalistic rabbi that is saying basically very similar things. And it's all around the issue of good and evil and all of these stories that the rabbis tell to get a point across, like the story of creation, for example. And basically, this little story says that that within every aspect of what seems to be total darkness or evil, um, there is still a little light, and that our job is to be compassionate, to be accepting, to be compassionate, and to be willing to entertain the possibility that in the very most mysterious way of our source before the creation that doesn't even have a name. They call it Ein Sof, whatever that means. Nobody tells, I don't have any clue. Before the before, um, that there is the light, that there is no darkness that is so black that there isn't a little bit of light, a little bit of fire in there to ignite the whole soul. And we need to be compassionate.
Excellent. And there are those who would say that the deeper reading of all of these texts is that there is only the light, and that when we're
Right.
perceiving something as dark, it means it's because we've chosen to turn the light of our conscious awareness away from it. And so anybody can create this sense of good versus evil, and we do it very, very quickly and very efficiently as soon as we judge.
We put our lights under the bushel and everybody else's bushel
And
basket.
and that the process is judgment.
That's
And so the more radical, the more profound teachings that I've ever been exposed to are the ones that say, like the Way of Mastery does in the third lesson, cancel every judgment. Give up any sense that you know anything. Learn to acknowledge your divine ignorance. Learn to live in the question, as Rilke would call us to, and then ask to be taught by this flow of energy or experience that you call life. Ask to be taught over and over again, day in and day out. And it's echoed in the Eastern traditions where they have a saying, I'll paraphrase it slightly, where they say, he who says he knows doesn't know.
Mm.
She who says she doesn't know, she's onto something.
Mm.
I, for the first time in my life, am really appreciating my intellect. And it's from what it was a flash this morning.
For the first time in your life, you're really appreciating.
Yeah, in my intellect. I've always kind of dismissed it. I think in rebellion of being demanded that that's all I could use. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. But I realized when you were reading Alan Cohen this morning that I have always questioned. I have always questioned on some level of myself, subconsciously, I don't know. But if I hadn't always questioned, I would have never gone through all of these spiritual paths that I went to in my asking a question that I didn't even know I was asking. But I was kind of a little religious rebel, I guess, even from 4. But I had no clue. How do you ask a question when you're 4 years old other than the constant question asking, I guess? I just wanted to say that I'm never going to diss my intellect again. I am going to put it in its proper place as a faithful, simple student. I mean, a servant, maybe a student.
Well, you're kind of loud there, Susan, when you cough. But yes, Celinda, I understand this as what you're saying is that the teaching that we've heard over and over again through the Way of Mastery and other books we've read is that we don't want to attack our intellect or our ego. We just want to see it clearly for what it is and understand that there's a place and a time for its offerings. But it's not necessarily best for us to use it as our primary user interface with the world.
Yes. And that's why I've been laughingly and metaphorically calling it down the rabbit hole. Because I don't know if I'm going down the rabbit hole until I get to the end. And am I at the portal of the Christ mind, which is there for me to open and to knock and to open and to welcome? Or am I at the end of this insanity of intellectual logic that leads me into a pit?
Well, and the good news is the systems that we've been given are equipped with the feedback mechanism to let us know, and that is our emotional state.
Yay.
And as Abraham Hicks would say, your most important creation in each moment is your emotion in that moment. And when you generate, and Michael Ryce talks very, very clearly about this in most of his workshops, when you're generating a negative emotional state, it's best used, the discomfort of it is best used as the pain that helps your ears grow. So you start to listen, you start to ask, you start to understand, oh, if I'm in pain, my thinking is in error. If I have any kind of a negative emotional state going, it means something about my choice of judgment or perception is inaccurate right now.
And any comments that Susan would like to make, I'm open for, because I just love the way we leapfrog over each other, all three of us, and anybody else who gets on here.
Well, I did have a thought. It's sort of going back to the business of a person coming to play a villainous part. I was thinking, what if we're all lined up in heaven and the drama is being cast? The leader of the drama, God or whoever, is saying, who is willing to play the part of Hitler, for instance? And if we all are fully enlightened up there and know who Hitler is going to be or represent on the earth, what an amazing sacrifice, amazing, loving sacrifice that actor is, who's willing to come and be and commit terrible crimes and be vilified. This is I would never do it. So that's sort of the basis for a huge worksheet on I'd never say yes. I trust I would never say yes because I don't want to be vilified. I don't want to be hated. What a brave person that would be willing to take that role of Judas or Hitler or somebody. That's not directly to what you're saying, Celinda, but it just crossed my mind.
Yeah, and then to think, Susan, that that person comes down knowing that they're going to forget.
Yeah.
That they agreed to this. You know how some actors get so involved in their characters that they actually lose it in relation to their personal life. I've read about this happening.
Mm.
You know, they just become so confused because of all these roles they've played, and they even talk about becoming this role, that they actually feel I am this role. You know, this is the person I am in that context. Well, how do you step out of that play and go back to whoever you are? And so it's like soul. Soul comes down. It's like that little soul story that whoever wrote.
The little soul and the sun.
Yeah, the little soul and the sun. Yeah, that story where he forgets, she forgets, whatever. Oh, this is a play. That boggles my mind. I mean, my brain cells.
Well, we all forget.
Yeah, we all forget.
And Christian Sundberg, didn't quite forget, or he unforgot when he got here at
Well,
age, what, 40, Dr. Tim? How old was he?
Well, the story, as I remember it from reading the book, is that when he was about 30, he ran into Thomas Campbell's work, and Thomas Campbell is a spiritual type philosopher that wrote the 3-book series, My Big Toe, and toe stands for Theory of Everything. And when Christian Sundberg started reading that work, he was so impressed that he went to Thomas Campbell and said, teach me. And Thomas Campbell said, no, I won't teach you, because the source of what you need to learn is inside you. Just start your own meditation practice. And through the process of doing his own meditation practice, Christian Sundberg remembered that his first 4 or 5 years of life, he had remembered his pre-life experience. And it was, like the curtain parted and it was shocking. And he was afraid to tell anyone. Eventually he told his wife, and then they encouraged him to tell some other people. And eventually he wrote the book. So now the story is out there. And the essence of the story is that in the non-physical realm, he had an experience of another consciousness that was just so attractive, bright, and clear, and had other attributes that he couldn't access in the spiritual consciousness. And he said, I want what you've got. And this other consciousness said to him, well, be careful what you ask for because, in order to get this kind of quality or whatever, again, all of this is happening without words, right? This is happening without bodies and without words. But in order to get what I've got, you've got to have a physical experience.
Mm.
And it's a lot more difficult, and most people don't want to go through it. And Christian Sundberg remembered saying, I want it even if it's difficult.
Well,
And so he went through it and had this life planned, whether it was his umpteenth life or whatever. But they had planned out a life that would help him learn the toughest lessons, about 98% of what he needed to learn. And as he was coming back into the physical, he panicked in terror because he understood what he was going to have to go through, the difficulties.
right.
And so he opted out and didn't make the final transition into the physical. And then he was, back in this non-physical realm, and they said, don't worry about it. We have the equivalent of a training camp, right? And we'll send you to the training camp, and you'll build some of the strength or comfort or tolerance, whatever words you can use for it. It doesn't really matter. They aren't using words up there. And then he went, okay, I've done that. Now I'll try again. And he was in the non-physical realm and starting to build his consciousness inside another fetus as it was growing. And he said, I don't want to do this. I'm scared. I don't want to do it. And then he remembered that a higher consciousness came to him. You could call it God, light, love, whatever, all it is, and reassured him it's going to be okay. And he said, all right, well, I'll only do this. I'll only go through with this if I can be guaranteed that I'll be reasonably intelligent. And if I can remember this part of my decision and the pre-physical planning. And so then they said, okay, you can do that. However, because you're going to have this intelligence and because you're going to have this remembrance, you're not going to accomplish nearly as much in this particular lifetime as you would have, blah, blah, blah. So this is just a way of conceptualizing it. That's what he talks about in his book. And so you might say, oh, I wish I had that. But then if you had that, you wouldn't have the trials. I love the way Guy Finley gave a talk, and he said, how many people here want to know God better and want to be enlightened and know God better? And everybody raises their hand. And then he says, okay, and how many people here want to go through the trials that are going to teach them that they have to let go? And every hand goes down.
Yeah.
Right? I want the enlightenment. I don't want to go through what it takes to be enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
That's all of us at some level or another.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And so at a certain level, he was talking about it yesterday in the book as we're reading from Alan Cohen. In the physical realm and in the athletic gyms, they have a saying that says, no pain, no gain.
Right.
And the way of Mastery and Course in Miracles would offer, that's not really the way it works. No pain, no pain. You don't have to buy into pain. You don't have to create the suffering that you create. You weren't intended to suffer here. You're intended to wake up to your true nature, which is this bliss state, which is this connection to everything, etc. So you might say you have to have the pain to grow, and you might say, I don't really need it, but I'll use it if it happens. Pick your own way to interpret and respond to this, because that's what's going to create your experience of life. And in that, you have the option to create a life that's far more loving than the one you've been living currently. So pick well. Mike Dooley says, thoughts become things, so choose the good ones.
When I was teaching yoga at a fitness center, that no gain, no pain was plastered on the wall. And I would tell my yoga students, let's change this. Let's say slow gain, no pain. So I guess I've taken the slow gain, no pain, but it's all coming together in any way we are willing to go. Spirit life comes in, and and nudges us along. I like to think of ruha as the like smoke or water or something. All it needs is the tiniest opening, and it will flow in. And the tiniest softening of our resistance, and it will flow in.
Well, choose the good ones,
Yes.
right? I'm grateful for awareness of these kinds of tools from the perspective of offering that I am actually creating my experience of life. And the increased awareness of how it is that I'm doing that has been beneficial beyond words. And yet it's only of benefit to me if I actively apply it. And if I fall back into the idea that life is happening to me, then I don't create as much of a loving, compassionate, joyful experience of life. If I stay in this question of asking, how is whatever's happening for me, and how might I be taught by this moment, then I stay in that wide open growing space that I tend to prefer infinitely more. So I will thank you both for the comments and questions. I'm hopeful that this has been useful and that people are hearing. My app, as I said, has been malfunctioning through the whole thing. Thank you for those who've been listening and typing comments. I have typed several comments in that my app shows me disappeared. So I will remind us all that we have a support group tonight. All the information you would need to join us is available on the mindshiftersacademy.org website. I'll remind us all that Michael and Jeannie will start up a second hour within minutes after me ending this hour. And I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.